So we'll call the meeting to order of the CVSD board for our first budget meeting here on December 6th. We have one adjustment to the agenda, which will be 613, which will be calendar item. Colleen went through and was organizing her schedule and realized we have a meeting scheduled for the evening of town meeting day. So it wouldn't be a good idea to have this meeting while the votes were being counted, not knowing what the outcome would be. So we're gonna have a conversation about moving that meeting. Are there any other requests to the agenda? Nobody contacted me, so. So we'll move on to audience and communications. I assume that our 4 members of the audience are our new budget buddies. We have, you're not?
CSEA rep.
Okay, okay.
Everyone introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my name is Chris Gerson. I'm sorry, I feel like
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for being here, Chris. It is your school and it is their school now.
Right,
And one of our teachers.
Yes.
okay. Great.
Maybe you could ask them to
Yeah,
introduce
could you introduce
themselves.
yourselves?
I'm Alice Brown. I'm a budget buddy from Shelburne.
Excellent.
Alice Brown.
I'm Lynn Jonick, Miss Charlotte Budget Buddy.
Are there budget buddies from the other towns too?
We have John Hall from Williston, who's on the way.
Yes, I think he's on his way.
Okay. And,
Jean Jensen is probably coming today.
right,
Excellent.
and we don't have a St. George member yet, but we're working on it.
Jean officially Heinsberg now?
Jean lives in Heinsberg.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's bizarre.
Yeah, yeah, that's why she's
Right.
Wow.
so we recruited her.
So we will move on to reports to the board, the budget committee. Not sure how much you want to talk about the budget committee right now, since we're going to do all the work on the budget shortly afterward, but do you have any things you want to say about the committee itself and its functioning and things like that?
Smooth as silk, Dave.
Smooth as silk, all right. I have heard good things, so that's good. No? Okay,
Yeah, so, I mean, we had a meeting on Tuesday.
okay.
We, sort of, Brendan and, I think we only had 3 members there. But in any event, we spent time with Bob and Megan, some attention to the special ed budget, and a lot of going around on trying to make sure that we were going to get to a place where we had some comfort about being able to compare apples to apples expenditures and revenues last year versus our proposed budget this year. And sort of to that end, I had a separate meeting with Bob Miranda on Monday to try to answer some of the questions that came out of Tuesday's meeting, some of the loose ends. And, you know, just to preface the discussion that we're having tonight on the budget, you know, people should know that there's a great amount of work and sort of complicated accounting that went into transitioning to this new structure. And so Bob Miranda put a lot of effort, you know, in past months to get us to a place where going forward we would have a sensible accounting of our budget. It's a different structure than it was before. You know, with CSSU charging back from schools, special ed being at CSU, other functions being at the school levels. You know, everybody knows from having been through the budget process that it was a complicated structure, and this is a different structure. So to do a real clear apples to apples comparison required a lot of untangling of that web of sort of how we've transitioned from one to the other. So I'd like to thank, you know, Bob Miranda for the time that they spent with us as a committee and with me separately. And, you know, hopefully in short order we'll have something that will, I think, be much easier for the board to look at and make sense of.
Okay.
Thank
Great.
you.
All right, Russ, any reports on negotiations? I know we'll have an executive.
Cindy, correct me where I'm wrong, but we have our first meeting with the union, I believe, next Tuesday. And Cindy's been going back and forth, I think, with them on ground rules for the negotiations. We've got a tentative schedule that takes us out through next May or June. So we're just about to get going.
Okay, great. That's awesome. What day is that? That would be the 13th? Okay. Great.
And those are open to the public.
Yep.
So,
Good. Thanks for reminding us. Communications, we've had some conversations via emails to try and figure out next steps. We have laid out a statement of work for the communications plan that we have. I think that we were looking to finalize that and send it out just for quote, but then also run it by members of this board. It's very similar to the presentation that we had in September about the scope of what we're going to do. And we're going to send that out we're going to put it on the website for open bid and see if folks are willing to provide support for that. It's helping to, it's covering meetings, writing articles, and then distributing the articles to local press and in each town.
Is there a chair of this committee?
Officially no, but I think it probably would be Aaron, I think.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. So
Yep.
is that who I would contact, just to make sure that, because I think we should get that going,
Yep,
so,
yeah.
okay.
I also have a question. Do we have a plan for communicating about the budget? I feel like we really, my husband didn't even know. I had a meeting tonight. So I think you really kind of need to get the word out, especially since this is our first year. We don't want to make people think we're trying to.
Right, and that's the goal. That's the first job. Is getting as much information out there about the budget as possible. So
Should we
I,
have like the Williston School District page on Facebook and other ways that we communicate? Do we just communicating through those channels, or are we going to centralize a channel before we do budget communications? Like, do we even know? What? No. not
do we
yet.
know what? I mean,
Do we
that's-
know like what our communication about the channels for communicating about the budget? What those will be?
So those are going to be. We're going to work through the print media to get folks outside of the school, and then, use channels like your Facebook page, the Shelburne Facebook page, which I think every school has one of those, and things like that. Yep.
So during the study committee, I thought what was very effective was channeling information out to individual board chairs for Front Porch Forum postings and just little snippets. I'm wondering, even like tonight's meeting, it would be helpful if somehow we used our local communities and put a little, here's the agenda for Tuesday's meeting, blah, 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 and if you want to show up, this is where it is.
Okay.
And
Yep, that's an easy one.
those are simple,
Yep.
and having one person draft them, and then they go to, I don't know if the communications committee has a rep in each town.
can you remind me who's on the communications committee?
Kevin, myself, and Aaron.
And Dave and Aaron. So, not
Is
somebody
that
from each town.
is that one that would be helpful to have someone from
Yeah.
each town on it?
I'm not sure
Again, we're
that
gonna
you,
run into the problem where that's easier said than done when there's only one person from St. George and two from Heinsberg.
I know, I was looking at you, Mark.
Yeah.
Well,
Can you clone
When
yourself?
we have so many committees with one person from each town,
But for distributing within each individual town, and I think we're going to write an article, and then,
Yeah,
or write a
you should
small
have a
relief,
point of
and then
contact,
we could distribute it to folks in each individual town to be the FPF contact.
So if we
In
have-
that example.
So that Mark, perhaps for Charlotte, might be the contact from the communications committee, so that Mark could put out a Front Porch Forum posting based on the context for Charlotte.
Right.
And then
He doesn't have to be
Ray
a
or
member of
I
the
could do it
committee,
for
but he can.
Heinsberg.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think Colleen and I are kind of trying to get at, you have to have like responsibility assigned to people, because if everyone's responsible, nobody's responsible.
Right.
So I think we need to make sure that that's very clear, because I'm not sure that, at least in Williston, it was necessarily clear who should communicate, and I think we just maybe need to make it cut and dry, and that would be good.
Okay. Yep. You're not missing anything. It's just not been
And of
communicated.
course, Kelly can be on every committee.
Okay. Did you have a goal? What was the select board meetings in town?
So these are things that Bob and I have talked about.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to the town clerks first. Last year, during the study committee process, Sandy, Bob, and I met with the town clerks, and we felt that was really a very productive meeting to get them all together. And that experience and listening to Val Gardner speak about, the kinds of ways that we need to communicate with our communities isn't just through board meetings. It really needs to be an active engagement. So we were thinking that setting up meetings with the town, it's the select board, either like in December or early January, to say, here's what our budget is looking like, and to take another page out of Val's presentation, to not have Shelburne board members meet with the town clerks, with the select board in Shelburne, but to have maybe one Shelburne person and one Heinsberg person and one Williston person, so that we continue to behave as if we are one entity. So just put it on there to see what your reaction to that is.
Yeah, I think it's always a good idea to communicate to each individual town.
This would be meeting with them. So
It's not, you're not saying going to an open select board meeting and then,
we'd have to contact them and find out what would work for them.
right. Yeah, I mean, I'm open to that. I like the
Yeah.
idea of having different members of each,
Mm-hmm,
have the folks be
right.
a different makeup. I
To
think
my
that's-
mind, though, be hard pressed to go around to 5 different towns and do that separately. Maybe it looks something like the legislative breakfast where, some group of the board holds a meeting or holds a breakfast, a lunch, whatever, and invites those parties from each of the towns to attend, rather than trying to somehow jam
Yeah.
5 meetings into January with all of those, with each town.
Do you want to meet just the select board members or the community at large?
We were just thinking the select board, thinking that they're an arm of government in the town,
And I briefly talked with Elaine about this earlier, and we have somewhat different perspectives on it, but I also put out there that we have existing board members in our communities who we want to continue to maintain some level of engagement. So perhaps, if there's one meeting, you invite select board members, and I can't imagine that every select board member would show up, but there might be 2 from each board perhaps, and then our existing local district boards, there might be a couple people from each that might show up.
All manner of open meeting tallies that are gonna have to be figured out for something
Right.
like that. And who warns it and all of that.
Right. Right, exactly,
It'll be interesting.
exactly.
If I could,
Yeah.
the part of the reason that this kind of galvanized for Elaine and I is Trevor and Heinsberg approached us to request that somebody help them understand how the process is going to unfold between here and town meeting day, and wanted a small group to join the select board at their regularly warned meetings Monday in December.
What's a Trevor? Is he the?
Trevor
town
is the
manager?
town manager or the town administrator for Heinsberg. So that's where some of this came from.
And just to be really clear, Colleen and I don't disagree that we want to mobilize the support of all the board members. We
It's
have a
the number of meetings.
We have a disagreement about whether we ought to schedule more board meetings of the local boards right now while we're in the middle of budgeting.
Right, right.
So I just wanted to be clear about that, because I really do believe that, of course, we want to engage as many people, and people who have been actively engaged in the past are the most likely people to want to be engaged and to, be helping out.
And to continue to cultivate local leadership.
Yeah.
We,
Yep.
All right. Okay. all good ideas. I'm kind of partial to going to a select board meeting with 3 members from the board and speaking for 10 minutes versus planning a large gathering for.
Sides had the or both bodies had the opportunity to hear what the other was planning to present as a budget. Is that something that still is going to happen, should happen, or won't happen anymore?
That's the $1 million question that we've had about.
Right, I think that's a good question, and
Yeah.
that has to be answered between now and Shelburne's case, January 19th.
Yeah.
But the setting for that was that the Shelburne board would present their budget and CVU would present their budget.
Yeah.
The agenda would now be for CVSD to present their budget, but.
Yeah.
And each of us did that anyway in our different communities, right?
In some, not quite as scheduled the way
Right.
Shelburne's was, but yes.
Right. But what I thought I heard you guys say about the select board wanting the explanation of the process, that sounds different than.
Right.
In listening to Trevor, it was kind of he and the select board awakening to the fact that things are different. We're gonna have to print about 3/4 of the pages that are in it.
Well, we'll be printing other things.
Could very well be. So anyway, he was more interested in kind of the sequence and an informal conversation about kind of how it's all going to unfold with
Do you want to use my phone?
Could I real quickly?
Yeah.
Just let her know that I'm here.
Okay, so one of the challenges that we kind of realized during the study committee meeting, and certainly since we've emerged, is how to do two things simultaneously, and that is ensure equity across all of our schools, making sure that we have equal supports and resources behind every kid, and the notion of autonomy for the individual schools. And that's a notion of, we're not looking for cookie cutter schools. In Chittenden South, we take great pride in that our schools are unique, they're innovative, and that there is local autonomy. And so I'm just going to present like how we are approaching the instructional budget small, and it's even small up there, but in the center is the main components of our mission vision. What do we care about for our kids? That they learn, that they think, that they live, they contribute, and they pursue excellence, right? And in that area, we start with the standards at the top. There's stuff that they need to learn. And we've identified that, the state board has identified that. And there are instructional best practices, brain-based, differentiated, personalized, all of that. That there's professional development that's embedded, and this is in the quality standards, but it's also like in the work that we do all the time, and that's continuous. So I just want to take a break here to say, think of what we did last year when we said, okay, we're going to find time in the calendar, in the schedule, to provide professional development every week. That really addresses that piece about professional development. It needs to be embedded and it needs to be continuous. It's ongoing. It's not like some date certain in October and then not again till January or something. And we have to like get our heads wrapped back around whatever it was we were doing. It keeps going. That there are assessments that are formative that help a teacher determine what it is she or he needs to do with an individual student, a group of students, a whole class. That are summative, that tell us a little bit about like how are all of our first grades in Charlotte, how are they doing in a particular thing. And then there are state and national level assessments that kind of give us a grounding about how are we doing compared to other people. And then reporting progress, and we've done a lot of work on that. I should let Jeff speak to this, but the jump rope program that we do, connected, we're trying to connect that with the personalized learning process, is a way to report progress that we think is way more authentic, that is way more based on actual learning that kids are doing, and that is a more honest reflection of where they are. Let's see what else is there. Parent-teacher conferences and the annual report. And we're always talking about parent-teacher conferences, and for some schools, looking at student-led conferences, and some schools have been doing that for a long time, but like what does that look like if the student has a personalized learning plan? And just to like take a little bit of a bird walk on that, personalized learning plans by education quality standards are required in 7th grade. In Chittenden South, our commitment is let's start these in kindergarten. What does it look like in kindergarten? And what if you did have a kindergartner that could speak to, this is what I care about my learning, this is what I'm really interested in, and that went all the way up through. We think that would be really exciting. So, in order to do any kind of crosswalk between equity and autonomy, we need to look at how do our supports and resources compare across districts. And so these are the things we looked at: staffing patterns, ratios, student-teacher ratios, administrator-student ratios, administrator-teacher ratios. What's the instructional support to that classroom? So what are the things that we do that provide support for the learning in the classroom? I mean, in our world, the classroom is the center of the universe. This is where the first learning happens. So how do all these supports help the classroom? Special education support, unified arts programming, so that gets into more whole child kind of things. Unified arts in some schools is called related arts, and in some schools is called expressive arts. I have decreed that on July 1, 2017, same things will be called same things, and different things will have a different name. We haven't decided what the different names will be, but honestly, we have so many things in our system that, like you're talking to somebody and they go, what is that? And you're, oh, that's what you call whatever. World languages programming, library media programming, student health supports, and counseling and behavior support. So we're looking at all of that. How does that look across all the system? And is there some way to quantify each of these so that we could get an actual number at the bottom of the page that would be a logical, rational number that you could then compare and say, wow, we've got a whole lot more support behind kids here than we do here. And our goal would be, over time, to get that number to be, within a range, the same, right? While all that stuff up there could be different. That's the autonomy part. All that stuff up above, you could say, hey, you know, in our school, we really like big classes because it allows us to have X, Y, Z. Or you could say, in our school, we really like small class sizes. And we know that that means we don't have X, Y, Z, but we do that in our classroom. You know what I mean? That's the autonomy piece that we're trying to preserve. So here's a look at what administration looks like. I think, you know, here, this new board, you guys need to wrap your heads around this. I think it's really great that people show up to do the little tour of the building, because it really is, these are your buildings now. All of you now have responsibility for all of the schools, all of the students, and it's important that you understand the structure of how things are operating. So Charlotte Central School, we have a lead principal, and I put days in FTE. That's because this is, you know, some of the stuff I'm going to tell you, you're going to hear me say 10 times, it's not a budget document. The numbers that we used are only so that we could quantify and compare. They're not real numbers. When we determine if somebody's full-time, one full-time FTE, we use the standard of a teacher. A teacher is a full-time FTE in our system. That's 189 days, full-time FTE. So anyone who works 189 days or more, we call that full-time. But we have principals that are on 260-day contracts and principals who are on 210-day contracts. So in order to quantify that so that it can make sense to people, we've called it 0.9. So in Charlotte, right now, we have a lead principal who is a full-time principal, the 260-day contract. We call that 1 FTE. And we have an instructional leader who works 210 days. We're calling that 0.9. Do not compare. It's still a full-time person, but it's 0.9 in terms of the number of days that they're expected to work. And we have a special ed administrator that is 0.45. That's 105 days. In Heinsberg Community School, we have 2 co-principals. They each work 210 days, so that's equivalent to 1.8 FTE. We have a special ed administrator, this year shared with Charlotte. So that is based on the resource, you know, based on numbers of students. I'm talking about the special ed 0.45. We're having lots of conversations about, is that the best model? Is that the best way to do that? So always we believe that we are about continuous improvement and learning when things are working and continuing with that, and when things might need a little bit of a toggle or something. Shelburne also has 2 co-principals. They are 260 days, and they have a special ed administrator who's 210 days. Allen and Williston Central School have always seen themselves as a single system, even though they have 2 buildings. And so that's how they're listed here and how we'll continue to list them. They have a lead principal, and they have 2 building principals, and they have a special ed administrator. So in total, they have 4.0 FTE. And CVU has a lead principal. I probably should have named these people. Adam. And they have 2 house directors. That's a new model for CVU in the last couple of years. They have a curriculum director. They have an athletic student activities director, and they have a special ed administrator full-time. That's what this looks like if you look at ratios. So the number underneath each school is their current enrollment. And all the numbers that I'm looking at and all the ratios I'm looking at this year, that's what we've gotten into the program. So for Charlotte, it is 1 administrator to 153 students. In Heinsberg, it's 1 administrator to 228 students. In Shelburne, it's 1 administrator to 252. Williston, 1 to 244, and CVU, 1 to 180. So that's kind of what we start looking at and saying, you know, like, does that look like it's the same? And then remember, the number that we care about the most in terms of resources behind kids is going to be the number that gets spit out at the bottom. Because there are other supports that schools provide that can support the principals and the leadership.
Are the numbers under the K-8s, is that K-8 or pre-K-8?
That is K-8, not pre-K.
Not pre-K.
Just K-8. So, I'm sharing with you, actually I should show you I'm not sharing the real sheet, but I just want to show you the work that we've been doing. So I explained to you conceptually what it is we were trying to do. And so the idea was, okay, so is there some way that we can quantify all of these positions and give them a numerical number so that we can end up with a number at the bottom? Found a person related to one of our friends over here. Cindy Kahneman Warren's brother was the person who helped us develop this. So that the way we did the work was to say, if you have a teacher, if you're a person on a teacher contract, we gave that a particular number. Doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter if you've got 40 years of experience or 1, it doesn't matter if you are on a family plan or no plan for insurance, whatever, if you were that, that's how we did that. If you were on a support staff contract, we did the same thing depending on the level. So if you were a paraspecialist, that was a certain number. If you were a general para, that was a certain number. But in that way, we could plug in numbers and then get a number at the bottom that actually represented support. What you're seeing here, this is what this document looks like. I call this version 2.0. Tomorrow, Cindy and I and Jeff are meeting with her brother again to work on version 3.0 because I didn't want to share these numbers with you yet. Today, when we were meeting, we had questions ourselves. Wait a minute, how could that number be that? And then we found the answer. But there are a lot of things like that we need to go through. But this is the kind of information you will have when people in your community say to you, how can you ensure that there's equal resources behind every kid? We have a system for doing that. So you could do this. We did it today, this afternoon, when we were looking at this. You could start circling some numbers. You could say, well, this is interesting, you know? And the numbers you'd circle wouldn't be in the same place, right? I put an asterisk on the totals because, so just as an example, administration there, you have a ratio. Administration total includes administrators, administration support, bookkeepers, clerical pool, and then you get an administration total. Classroom broken out by kindergarten, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can pop out and see what does it look like across the whole system in terms of class sizes, that kind of thing.
Elaine, can I just
Yes.
test what you were saying before? So when you were talking about values, counting people at different levels.
Yeah.
So what you're saying, for instance, in administration,
An administrator?
a principal and the principal's secretary would not be counted as one person each. That's so you say that.
Well, for the ratio, they might be.
Right.
But for the money that's going to get spit out, because the bottom number is going to be a per pupil.
So when you
How
said-
much money per pupil? So,
But I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
maybe I was asking questions differently. So you were saying before that, like a classroom teacher was
a certain
X,
number, yep.
and
A principal is X.
the same X,
No.
a different X.
A different X, based on what our actual, kind of a midpoint. That's why it's not a budget number. This
So
all tracked
it's
to
different because of expense or because of something else?
principals or administrators, well, we pay them differently, yep.
There's two different sets of data that have gotten commingled.
Yes.
So what she's presenting right now is the real FTE based on real people. There's a second section to the data that she's holding up there that is equated a dollar value to FTE based on position category type. So when she gets to the per pupil, it's a factor on the actual FTEs. So the numbers up there are strictly FTE. They have nothing to do with values
But
that
these
have
are
been added.
FTE per pupil too, that's why I was confused, aren't they?
Well, I'm only on this one still.
They are FTE per pupil.
Can I ask the question in another way?
Yeah.
I mean, part of the PICUS report is related, and Eric's familiar with that, but part of it is related to the critique related to the number of adults in a building to the number
Yes,
of pupils.
Right.
And if the state can reduce by 0.5 or
Yes,
something.
yeah.
then it saves so many millions of dollars in the state. Is that this ratio here? Is the adults?
This is adults to
Students?
Yes. Yes, in every one of those categories, oops.
Okay.
In every one of those categories, it's adults. Without distinction in this part, whether you're a principal, a teacher, a para,
Person is a
a
person.
counselor, or- exactly.
And then this connects to some of the other work that began with the special ed, where it starts looking at how we use the adults in the building.
Yes.
That's where you're going, okay.
Yeah, but that's all this is, just.
So that'll be the next
ratio
part. Yeah.
adults to students. That's
This
all it
is-
is.
Yeah,
John?
And then if I just, I think to close the loop, the next step that you're trying to do is to turn that into a resources per pupil.
Yes.
By basically scaling the resource behind each of those adults.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly, yes. So, any more questions about that last slide before I move on to this one?
Oh, I just have a question.
Yes.
Library media, is that like librarians?
Yes.
Okay.
I can tell you exactly what's in there. Library media has professional library media specialist, para-library media, and para-library non-intensive. So people, again, this is about the edict that's coming down on July 1. They're the same thing, would we call the same thing? They're not right now. And so we need to just, but we've categorized them that way. So this is how we comply with the education quality standards. Green is full compliance as stated in the EQS. White just means it doesn't apply. And yellow means either we are working real hard on this and we're getting there, or it means we comply, but we comply in a way different than it's written in the EQS. And the EQS allows for that, actually. So you can see on this page, we either fully comply or we're on it. Questions about this page?
And if you weren't, there would be a red block in there.
Oh, well, you will see one
Okay.
eventually. This is about school leadership. And again, the one exception, and it's an exception because I don't know, you decide the fair thing to do would be to write a question mark there, is around time for teaching, a course, being an advisor, getting involved in student engagement. And in some general way, I could put yellow in there or I could put green in there, but I felt it was more honest to just put a question mark and then bring that to the principals and say, hey, what are the ways that you do this? Because there's a whole section on school leadership in the education quality standards. Any questions about this page? Yeah.
so what kind of metrics are you using to determine this? Is this just based on principal perspective of what's going on in the building?
No, based on what we know. So licensed is easy, we have that.
Yeah.
That they have a leadership team, we know that. We know they have a leadership team, every single one of them. Professional learning groups, well, so there's an example, and I worked with Jeff on this today. Everybody was around the table, but Jeff and I mostly. We know that in Williston and at CVU, clearly they have something they call professional learning teams, and they work together, and we know the work that they do. And we know that in the other schools, they are all working on that, but we didn't feel comfortable to just say, yes, that should be a green. Is that fair, Jeff?
Yeah, again, calling them different things and using different structures, and so
Yeah.
we wanted to be clear with the principals and run this by them. But right now, we know something exists, but it varies from school to school.
Yeah.
What does minimize supervision of non-teaching staff mean?
So that means that, in a way, it was one of the selling points for having a central board, right? Let's make sure that the principals are really focused on instructional leadership, so that they're not supervising the food services director,
Building,
yeah,
facilities?
all of that.
Okay,
Let's focus their attention on instructional programming.
good, thank you.
The professional learning groups is just professional learning groups among administrators and leaders, not among the whole school and teachers.
No, professional learning groups are teachers.
So
Administrators.
isn't that a key part of the early release on Tuesdays?
Well, so that's the conversation that we had today, exactly, that's where we went. I said, well, could you say because of that? And we could clearly say it for Williston and CVU because we could say the words, and if you asked us, I could point to Jeff and he would say exactly what they're doing there. But I can't, neither one of us could do that for the others, even though we know they're working on it. That's why it's yellow. We felt very confident putting it in yellow, but Yeah, so then I suppose from this grid, in the places that the yellow pops up, then you'll be able to drill down deeper
Right.
with the costs associated. Is that kind of how you're getting?
No, I wasn't thinking of that, no, I wasn't, so say a little bit more about that.
Well, I'm just thinking like from a budget perspective, if you, in literacy, you have green and you have programs and programs are being managed and there's a certain cost associated with those programs. Phys ed, there's yellow, so something's happening
So if we were
in
on
phys
that
ed.
page, I thought you were on this page. Yes,
Oh.
for the other page.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so then, when we're looking at decision packets, for instance.
Right.
We look at this, we go like, or might invite a decision packet, either on the part of the board or an administrative team or, okay? Supervision and evaluation, we have that in spades, and even though we have it in spades, this is who we are as an organization. We had a work group last year that looked at supervision and evaluation, and they're still working this year, and they're looking at what other programs are out there, but our programs are in full compliance with the SPS. Questions about that? Yeah.
Can I go back to the other slide? And I just want to follow up on Erin's
Yep.
comment. I am concerned that we did change our calendar this year to accommodate the professional learning groups for each school. So to see it yellow tells me that, you know, what's missing. So I'm just
It could be
concerned about the
nothing. It could
public
be
perspective. You know, I know the activities are happening.
So yellow doesn't mean anything's missing. It means that we might be meeting it in a way different than is specifically articulated in the EQS. And the EQS specifically says you can do that. So we're not saying we're not doing it. And in fact, we wouldn't say that we're not doing it. We'd say, yes, every school is doing it. We just don't have the label and structure in our head to be able to say exactly what it is. But after Monday's lead meeting, my guess is I could put that in green, because then we'll know.
So it might just be a shared lexicon.
Yes.
I mean, it might be that it's all happening.
Exactly.
The words that people are using to label it might be different in each school.
Right, and it could be that we don't know. It could be that we don't know. I will tell you, this is honest to God truth. I feel like I really have a pretty good understanding of what happens in every one of the schools and what's going on, and there are a lot of structures in place to make sure that I do know all of that. But going through this process, I know a whole lot more than I've ever known before. And I wouldn't have been able to do that when we were all separate schools, because everybody does use a different way. Even in budgeting, I mean, Bob will testify to this, every school did it a different way. So how could you really compare? I mean, it's why, Eric, you keep asking about the budget. You had to learn that, like, people put the same thing in 10 different categories. And now we're trying to roll it into one. It's the same thing for having oversight of the system. As soon as the system makes more sense and you can put the piles together and you can organize it in your head systematically, you understand a lot more what you've got and how it can work. Megan and I have been working for the last 3 weeks on a system of student supports that, goodness sakes, we would have loved to have had that 50 years ago. But who had time to do that when everybody did it differently? And as Bob said, locally everybody had their 2 trump cards in their pocket anyway, so even if you wanted to do something, you're kind of at the mercy of, do people want to? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. So I think that what's happening this year, and it's a whole lot of work, that's the conversation you and I were having earlier, is that we're learning what it is we need to put in place to really understand ourselves, how the whole system works. And then be able to translate that so that you, especially you people right here, understand how the whole system works and you can articulate it to the public. I really believe that a year from now we will all be so much better at that. But it's a lot of work getting there because we're inventing it. It's a big system. I think we will all be better off. We will have much better systems in place. But I just don't want to misrepresent anything. But it's not saying that we're not doing it.
I'm just thinking that perhaps we have a big draft at the top and we get an update on this.
Yeah. I was thinking that when I get to the last slide, somebody would say, can we get an update on this at the next meeting?
I'm not
some
sure
other time.
what the best time for it would be, but I feel like it would be helpful to get a pretty detailed update on the early release Tuesdays, and maybe it's still a little too early to do
Well,
that?
actually, to that point, I know that every principal is doing something to gather information from the teachers. So in some schools, that's a formal survey, and in other schools, it is a conversation and discussion at a faculty meeting. They're all doing it differently, but everybody's getting that information so that we can share that with you.
The principals don't necessarily know what the teachers are doing on those early release days?
No, they're
for
not asking
Tuesdays?
them what they're
Okay.
doing. They're asking them.
How it's impacting.
How is this going? Oh, they totally know. They're the ones who are doing the,
Okay.
yep.
On that topic, is there any effort to collect feedback from the community, parents, families, kids?
We haven't gotten that far yet.
Is that something you're contemplating doing?
We certainly can. Yep. So staff evaluation, that one I think we had done. So here's those reds. So school counseling, we're good. And that is, there are very few places in the school quality standards that have those input measures. And here's where it is. And that was about, like, people said, if we don't have those numbers in there, you know, when they shopped it out to all the communities, if we don't have those numbers in there, schools are going to eliminate these positions. So there are numbers in there for school counseling. There they are. We meet the numbers in school counseling in every one of our schools. Coordinated school health, we are always working on that, and I bet you every school in the state is always working on that, or they're not working on it. But nobody's got green there, I don't think, not honestly. School nurse, we have 2 schools that do not meet that strict guideline, Shelburne and CBU. So we have 1 nurse in Shelburne.
But there's an assistant. She's not on her own.
Is it an assistant nurse, though?
I don't know.
No.
She's in the office.
It's a
there.
clerical
She's in the
support.
office, but it has to be a nurse. The way
Got it.
it's written, it has to be, it doesn't have to be a BA nurse. Doesn't even have to be an RN nurse. Could be a LPN, the assistant, not the main nurse. The main nurse has to be an RN or a BA nurse. But in both of these situations, there is support, but the support is not in the form of a licensed medical person. And that's,
And are these things you have to comply with? Or is this a standard you're supposed to make progress toward?
it depends which ones you're talking about.
For example, the school nurse.
You're supposed to meet these standards. Then nobody's gonna, there's no police that's gonna come down though, and you have to believe in your heart that kids are safe when they're there, and that you've got enough support that if something were to happen, there would be a person there. I think that that would be what the conversation should be. Yep.
When you guys update this, it seems to me that the yellow means 2 separate things.
It does.
Could you put an extra color in there and break those 2 out?
Yep, yep,
I was thinking the same
yeah. Yep, you can definitely do that. Good feedback. Here's the process and timeline. So I met, and the Colt team, all of us, started out with just going to be a couple of us, and everybody joined this meeting. Met with each of the building-based administrators and spent a couple hours reviewing staffing. Cindy did a whole lot of work so that people could look at things and say, yes, this is what we've got, this is instructional supports and potential additions and reductions. The operations team, so that's Bob and Cindy's group, reviewed the staffing and pulled that all together in a single budget. We've had at least once, and now we'll have again on Monday, meetings with principals to look at their decision packets, to look at their budgets, to now look at these numbers, and to inform their thinking about things. And we developed the instructional programming matrix that helps us understand it. So in December, this is on Monday, the code, we actually started today. So here, this is an interesting process. So today, we sit down, we think that we've planned it ahead, and we have a matrix for determining like how we're gonna rate every decision packet. It's great, like on paper, conceptually, you go like, this is easy. And then how many hours later? Hours later. We're like pulling our hair out. Oh my God, this is so hard. How do we do this? feel like because this process isn't working, we need to do something else. We need to bring this to the principals and cluster them in ways so they can understand it, along with the ratios, so they can see you are asking for this. Are you low or high on that ratio? Does this make sense? And again, kind of model something that Megan did with special ed administrators. And so that's where we are. We really are learning as we're going along about the process that will work, that will inform the decision, and that will allow us to come back to you so that you can look at it in a way that has context and say, yes, this is what we support or don't support, or this is our highest priority. Questions about that?
I take it that Colt is a consolidation leadership?
Oh, no, it's a central office leadership team, so that is Megan, Cindy, Jeff, Bob, and
Thank you.
sorry about that. Questions? I mean, that's questions all along, but anything else? Or charges? I heard about adding another color. I heard about consider a survey to parents.
Just, Elaine, just on the survey of the parents thing, and to go with Erin's thought, I think maybe the bigger question is specifically for that is that, and we could think about it going forward too in terms of communication. We made a policy change. It was a big policy change. It would be nice to say after this year, what were the pros and cons of that?
That's exactly what the principals are doing.
That's another form of communication to the constituents.
That's exactly
of
why
how-
the principals are doing it now. Anticipating that.
I realize this is a pie in the sky question, but when we talk about focus on equity and ratios, assuming numbers are all equal, there isn't a calculation of a higher needs student, ELL students, low SES students.
You know, that was a more, the word I have in my head is not a good word. A more relevant conversation years ago. We are now, every one of our schools is a Title I school. And the school that, one of the two schools that was a Title I school first off is less needy than the others. Honestly, the numbers are surprising. You would be surprised if you saw the numbers in terms of the demographics. The demographics are not what they used to be. So we have less of a concern about that. Every one of our schools pretty much is in a range of, 10 to 12% in terms of special ed and in poverty ranges, but it's not what it used to be. It isn't. I mean, that's
Higher or lower?
more poverty in all of our schools and equalization of the poverty across all towns. It's, even since I've been in this supervisory union, like 20 years, 18 years, it has changed.
So, I have a process question, and maybe it's just because I haven't been involved in the CVSD, but I kind of feel like I'm somewhat involved in what's going on in the schools. And I think when the vote to consolidate was debated, a big question of the individual communities was what involvement are we going to have with the budget process? And there was a talk about councils and things like that. Is that not happening at all? Is there anything happening at the individual school level to get input about the budget?
Well, at the individual school level, I'm feeling so when you guys have a meeting to discuss anything about budget.
A little bit.
So that would be still,
But not within the community, not within the community providing input. We do those, what they call budget forums.
yeah.
I mean, is there anything happening to that effect?
FAP in Williston, right? Wouldn't that?
Well, so yes, people are, and Pi in Heinsberg and FAP. So, yes, but not at the level that, but honestly, in the last, I don't know how many years when we had this budget, maybe one. Early on when you did a class, I can remember being in this room and having a ton of people. I also remember in the last 3 years having like 3 people, and the same 3 people would come every time, and in some places, nobody. People would actually schedule their meeting knowing that we might just jump to the budget meeting because nobody came to the forum. That's not a bad thought, though. I just think that this year, figuring all of this out, figuring out how last year's budget translates to this year's budget, figuring out how do we get to a number that we can have with some confidence say, here's what it looks like across, that is very consuming.
And Lynn?
Of the amount of time that you have to work on budget, because remember, there's all kinds of other stuff we do in schools besides budgeting that's actually, in terms of learning, more important.
I guess it just goes to that whole conversation about engaging the select board.
Yes,
We had a whole community that was really concerned about losing that connection with the school, and if all of a sudden they're given a budget at the end of January and have never been given an opportunity, I don't know how you do
Yeah, no, I
it.
think that's a really.
No, and
That's
just
a good
if I may
point.
speak as being on the consolidation committee, I think the spirit of what our intent was for the new board, that we are now the new board, but that board was that going forward, that we would be proactive looking for avenues for that to happen. But we recognize that this budget process this year, being newly formed with, and trying to do this, we were probably not, that wasn't going to be a priority for this year.
You should probably just tell people that then. I mean, instead of people wondering when they're gonna have the opportunity and realizing there isn't gonna be one.
Right, or maybe we need to have a conversation about it. You know, Cole needs to have a conversation about it and just see.
It's so tricky because remember those days and we in Shelburne would be looking at Charlotte and you'd see, wow, their numbers are so different from ours, and on one hand you could read like, wow, that means we're getting a lot more, bang for our buck from our teachers because they've got an average class size this much bigger.
Right.
But if you were a parent, you might be saying, wow, I wish we were more like Charlotte and had a lot fewer kids in my kids'
Right.
class. And so it makes it all more complicated having when you're comparing everything and everybody's got a different opinion about what's the most important.
Right.
But Lynn's right. During the consolidation process, we talked a lot about how we communicate to the community about the budgeting process, because it is, it's the connection really to towns. It's what people get involved in, and going to the select board and doing all that stuff and having a budget forum. It's all stuff we've discussed. Even this meeting tonight, Lynn, it was in the school letter. The school letter was on Front Porch Forum that this was happening tonight. Reaching out is part of what we need to do more and figure out more as we go along.
I think as we reach out, it would really help to make at least one thing clear. There's no AGP this year. There's no allowable growth percentage that we're going to be quite as constrained by. Last year, I know we had a ton of people who came to Williston budget buddy, or like the budget meetings. So if we tell people that, it might make them a little less concerned about the budget.
Or more concerned.
But a lot of people who came to Williston were concerned about what was going to be cut, because we had cuts, so.
Correct me if you had a different experience, but I feel like by the time it gets to the budget forum meeting, it's kind of after the fact almost, in terms of audience input, community input, and those people who were most passionate about it came to the budget meetings, and they're still held, obviously, an open meeting. People still are invited and welcome and encouraged to come. It's just because the nature of the organization is different, it's going to look different, right? We're not going to be talking about we need 3 more Chromebooks at CCS. It's a broader discussion than that, but people are still, it was a small minority of people who engaged in those budget meetings, and there's, I think it's still as accessible in terms of being able to come. It just may be not as digestible in terms of the information, and that's where the board needs to try to distill it down or present it in a way that's accessible for people.
Or even just, I think of each town's individual board, what you've done probably, what we did at CPU, the last meeting, is Adam presented the decision package. We can't do anything about it, but we gave him our feelings about it. And I think that's kind of what I was expecting was going to happen, and maybe it was just me, but I thought that was kind of the sense of the councils that were going to happen with each town to provide that more local input to the principals before they then presented. And I get why it can't happen this year because everything is happening, but And maybe that wasn't everything in the conversation, but I know I did hear that a couple of
Yeah.
times.
Mm.
that that was
Yep.
a method. And
Yep.
I just think you have to tell people it's not happening.
Yeah, I think that's still a good idea. I mean, it's figuring it out and what that looks like and what the process is. It really is that we are flying the plane mid-flight right now.
You're
And
building
so-
the plane mid-flight.
Building, yeah, right. We're always flying.
We're always flying the plane, we want to
Yeah.
make that clear.
Yeah. Please back that tape up.
It was a great chance for a lot of humor. So we do have, any more questions on the presentation? So we do have dinner here. We just want to take 5 minutes, take a break, and have everyone just grab a bite to eat, and then we will go into the next thing, which is the preliminary review of decision packets. All right, so we'll come back into session, and Bob will discuss the decision packets.
So I have 3 things to share with you tonight. You have 2 of them in your hand, I hope. The Champlain Valley School District Function Summary, Fiscal Year 18 Proposed Budget and Exhibits, and the decision packets. The one you don't have in your hand is the comparative data for the following areas: facilities, speds, facilities, food service, and technology. I have it available as a PDF, and Sandy will send it out to all of you, so you have it and have a chance to look at it in detail. The facilities piece has been shared with the facilities directors, so they aren't necessarily unaware of the data. Same thing in food service. And the technology was pulled together by Mike Canfor, just drawing everything he thought would be appropriate to show you relative to how schools are set in a distinctly different manner. Also attached, working with the Finance Committee, there was a desire for some multi-year charts showing comparative growth of expenditures in particular areas of the budget. So we pulled that together. That's also attached. It looks at special ed salaries, operations and maintenance, capital debt, and fund balance through that 4-year window, including the current year behind us. So that's available for your perusal. The fund balance sheet in particular will be something this board wants in front of them when they get to January, deciding what they're going to do relative to use of fund balance to lower taxes to taxpayers. So that sheet of paper. Any questions on the comparative? As Elaine has indicated, those sheets get revised regularly. You look at them, tell me something looks funky. I go dig into it and either say it's funky because we're different, or I correct it. So the next sheet, and more importantly, I'd like to update you where we are on the budget. The board has seen a chart that looks like this. It's a function summary for the proposed budget of the new district. There is no prior year to compare to, or no prior year budget, because there is no such thing as a prior year or a prior year budget for CVSD. And I want to commend the work that Eric and Brendan did, and then Eric did with all of us trying to kind of improve the quality of these documents. So you will note that this has been revised. From now on, make sure you're going back no further than 12/6 for a picture of the function summary. If you have your earlier sheet with you, the earlier one had a total of $75,747,000. It now has a total of $75,451,000. So those of you slow with math, that's a good direction. Okay? Questions on the function summary? Next page is the composite function summary for your old school districts. I did not change that this time. This is past history. This is if you take each of the schools that send budgets to their voters for approval and add them up across the lines to the extent they can be added, that's what the totals look like. What Eric and I and Miranda spent a lot of time was trying to do a crosswalk between some of these numbers and some of the numbers on the first page. I think it was illuminating, and it was good work. And so we understand a little better, all of us, how they tie together even though they're quite different. So then the next page I wanted to share with you is a newly drafted revenue summary for the combined CVSD district. There are a number of changes that have occurred when we pulled everything together into one district that impact both expenditures and revenue. The most obvious example is last year, some of you got paid for tuition attendance of students, and some others paid that tuition. This year, over $1 million in tuition has just been wiped off of the books in both directions. So,
I'm sorry, was that all just within CSSU students?
Principally St. George sending kids to Williston and CVU. Tuition that any of you collect from someone outside of the circle will still be tuition that you collect outside the circle as a combined group. Be aware that this revenue page comes with it with some fine print. This is really, really early to pull together revenue numbers, given the fact that the state, large portion of it is special ed, the state hasn't yet answered us on what revenue we can expect from the state in support of special ed. They give that to us on December 15th. We typically wait to produce this document for December 15th, but due to pressure, we were getting to do some things a little earlier than past practice. We have graciously accommodated that. So you have a revenue forecast subject to revision. Finally, the sheet you've all been waiting for.
$1 million applied.
Okay, the fine print on Bob's chart says, generally we have left the numbers the same as the prior year, unless we have data already that it is significantly different. So we left the fund balance just as it was last year.
So you added up everybody's fund balance?
If you add up
allocation?
everybody's fund balance, you all collectively applied $1,088,000 to offset taxes to your communities collectively.
Which theoretically is possible.
Do you mean, is there more than 1,088 in the fund balance carrying forward? Yes. It's closer. You'll see that on the sheet I didn't give you.
That will be something.
Yeah. On this comparative, the last page, just to keep you satisfied, the combined balance, audited fund balance across CVSD as of July 1st last year is $2,865,502. So that could support a distribution of $1,088,000.
I knew that. I don't have the sheet, but I knew that.
Okay, so that's the revenue page. I think the best sheet of paper for you all is this sheet. It allows you to begin to look at how the budget is rolling up in a comparative basis to the prior year. And on this, I've included both expenditures and revenue. It's the sheet I'm looking at right here. Okay. I've included both expenditures and revenue to get to a net education spending across the combined districts. Last year it was $59 million, $59.9. This year it is $62,830,000, or an increase of 4.87% year to year. So we're on a net education spending basis, we're spending 4.87% next year than you are currently this year. Everybody clear with that?
That's with no decision packages, right?
That's with no decision packets decided on.
What's driving
That's,
that increase?
pardon?
What's driving that increase?
Excellent question, Alice. So the one that jumps out the first is there is $1,003,000 of added debt service cost to those communities that have a borrowing already in hand or a borrowing to be in hand shortly. That would be Williston and Shelburne. So added into that budget above is that $1,003,852. If you take that out, the increase is closer to 3.2%. And if you look at what budget assumptions we're kind of using to craft the first draft budget, that 3.2 comes close to those assumptions that you asked us to put the budget together with.
And can you just refresh what the tax commissioner said, that she thought generally budgets were gonna go up this year? What she was basing her tax number on?
I have received the letter. I honestly have not had time to read it from start to finish, but I did grab the one number I was interested in immediately, which is, in old letters, would be the expected tax rate increase year to year statewide. And in current law, it is the yield amount. She recommends the legislature set the yield at a certain amount. If she takes the yield number up, that means it's the equivalent of a tax rate decrease. She took the yield amount up. So she's in essence sending a signal that from her view and the work that she does in November leading to this December letter, likely tax rates effectively will come down as we move to next year. That's really good news, but I will tell you that most business managers, when they see that, go, there's got to be something wrong here. So, but anyway, it's good news, and we ought to take it as that. But there's a lot of people now pushing that to better understand it. Because last year, you may have forgotten, but last year they adjusted that tax rate based on, Joan, a $19 million one-time, do I have the right number? $19 million of one-time contribution to the ed fund. And at that time, we all believed they wouldn't be able to do that again. Somehow it's all worked out that we're even done that and we're better off. So it's grand list or something else happening across the state. Does that answer the question, Lynn?
Yes, so far.
What else do I want to say on tax rates? The other thing on tax rates is you all do know that if we take the same numbers all the way down to begin to do tax calculations for CVSD, we do the numbers the way we've done them last year, and then we take 10 cents off the tax rate and then work further on down the table. So I haven't commented on that. I just wanted you to have visibility of kind of how to kick the tires on the work that's done so far. Yes?
I'm sorry, this is another question or a piece of paper I don't have with me. Student count is relatively flat?
We haven't rolled it up. We get equalized pupil counts starting in about a week, and they're not frozen until closer to Christmas. So we'll know then. The enrollment across the collective group is relatively flat. So we wouldn't expect a big change, and we're pretty well flattening out now with ELP because we were an early adopter of that program, so we aren't going to see as much change on that end. So I'm worthless at doing this, but my guess would be it's going to be somewhere close to last year. Questions? Okay, then the next sheet of paper you're going to thumb through is the decision packet list. Looks like this. It has 3 pages, 2 of traditional decision packets, and 1 collecting all of the operations and maintenance and capital borrowing that someone might want to have the board consider. These 3 pages are a work in process. They probably changed 11 times in the last 2 hours. We're not expecting you to react to this as it is a recommendation to the board. It is a glimpse of the work that's unfolding both within people around this table, principals, and others, to bring to you a final list that warrants your consideration. I would guess the same way I guessed about equalized pupils, Gene, that this will be far shorter when it finally comes to the CVSD board. And will not ask for a contribution of money as large as this might have asked for. But I wanted you to have an understanding of kind of the conversation from A to Z, from one corner to the other. We're willing to answer questions on a particular item to the extent we can, but you'll get, before you're asked to consider it seriously, a full-up 4-page decision packet that's associated with each of those changes and has all the details you might be looking for. Yes?
So earlier, Elaine had mentioned leadership trying to come up with criteria for decision-making. I mean, it's something that we had done in Heinsberg years ago. We had like 12 different metrics that we used, and then it came up with a score. So part of this process, we will see that and review what your criteria are for prioritizing the decision packages, right?
Yes. And it may change based on our experience today. It may change from a matrix kind of evaluation to some other kind of commentary that warrants, that does explain why out of 10 we had available, we've chosen these to champion. That's kind of the difficulty and process we had this afternoon. It didn't really lend itself to 10 people independently scoring these.
Yeah, and just, for those who are not familiar with what we did, we had metrics such as required by law,
We had
number of children affected, number of staff affected, blah, blah, blah. So there were
exactly-
different categories. Yeah.
Had another 30 people been in the room besides us 5, we might have been able to do some of that, but it's a large organization to do it that all quickly with one list. So we'll be back to you on that. We will have a process of what we've used to flush it down to a list that warrants your attention. Are there questions on any of the items that we might, you're also kind. We're on the decision packets.
You kind of told us not to ask questions because it's still a work in progress.
Oh, you are so coachable, Alice. Okay, so go ahead. You have 3 questions, Alice.
What is TARC? Is that the parent? What's TARC?
TARC is the rocketry class that is taught in Shelburne, and funding required to make it a formal part of the budget. Yes.
CSD-1, behavior specialist. I would think that would be in the special ed budget.
It's part of their, and there's actually similar proposals in a couple different schools. That's in support of their general multi-tiered system of support, not necessarily just in support of kids who are on IEPs.
Oh, okay, so this is sort of opportunity room or whatever they want to call it, kind of.
Yep,
thing,
part of
so-
that system of student supports that everyone is sort of working on.
Thank you, Megan.
Yep.
I guess I have a question about the, all the directors in CSSU, facilities, food service, transportation. Is that, I guess we're still sort of pending a discussion on what your replacement or replacements might look like in terms of job descriptions. I'm skeptical that, transportation direction and food service direction are full-time endeavors. Unless you're getting rid of some building level personnel. My personal bias would be for fewer people with a broader set of competency than just somebody who might look at food service for what's still not that giant an enterprise.
Excellent commentary. The conversation you've connected to what the board might do with the shoes that open up that are right underneath me in a short period of time. There's no question that that's part of the process. I will tell you that I personally had to put those on some sort of list before I left because they've been a folder in my cabinet that comes out about every 2 years because somebody believes in their heart that it's the right thing to do, and then they end up back in the file cabinet because it's determined that at that juncture in time they're not the right thing to do. In general commentary, and I won't get into a lengthy defense of these until we produce the paperwork that sits in front of them, but each of those positions to a degree in time realizes enough savings to cover the cost of that position. Not necessarily the first year, but in large part for the example you just said, there's structures you all have in place running food service that have food service directors trying to cover that task from A to Z independently in 5 different places. Clearly that if it was consolidated, they wouldn't necessarily have that same scope of effort in 5 different places. You'd need a different level of resource locally on-site serving food to children, and then a level of experience and skill a layer up providing operational success. So that's the devil in the details, Eric.
I guess,
But
yeah, my only, and I don't have your other discussion, my personal recommendation or preference would be to see a request for whatever it is that's going in place of Bob. So it may be, these broadly fall under the rubric of operations, right? Is there an operations director and a finance director? I'd be probably not keen to approve 5 different sort of subdirectors, particularly if we couldn't identify specific savings. To say that they might cover themselves over time, I'd rather say, you have some negative numbers on here. Here's exactly what they say. We can do without half FTE or here or there, as the case might be.
Yep. Good point. I can contribute a lot on these 3, on the learning. I can't really add a whole lot of value to what you're going to do on July 1st after I leave. And I prefer that we just defer the whole conversation until the group is ready to put those 3 positions in front of you as a recommendation, because I'm not sure that'll occur either.
I guess my question is, couldn't that wait until we have clarity on, the Bob position? Like, would it make sense to vote on these 3 if we didn't know, if we hadn't had some kind of closure on what the structure above them looked like?
Are you asking, Eric, that we wait on some of these things until we have new Bob?
Absolutely.
To let him or her evaluate and recommend their direction?
Yeah, have a structure that's, we've lived this long without a food service director. Like, I'd be inclined to wait another year.
I guess to some extent that says then that we are going to wait a year, that if that's the approach, that we're going to take status quo on most of these things as we, try to find a new person, and then new person gets up to speed.
I would like to see these just work through this year with or without Bob's departure. I think that as a group, we're going to vote on it and we're going to decide what we're going to do. Staying status quo kind of scares me a little bit, especially in the absence of having somebody in a position.
Could the old Bob make a point? I'd really like it if you dropped the conversation at this point. Because I originally said I didn't want you to start the conversation until we give you the details of what we're asking for. I really don't want you to make a decision before you've had the benefit of that and the process that we're still going to work. So if you can, they're all great thoughts, but just hang on to them. They're relevant when you have something that's been asked for you to weigh in on. Yes, Alice.
So here's a question about equity, just how we're going to do this decision packet. Just for example, you see that Charlotte is deleting summer school, where we know in Shelburne there are 100 kids in the summer who do summer school. How do you justify equitability in that? How do you make that equitable?
You struggle with that at both the Colt level, as Elaine has outlined, and then our all-up lead meeting with all principals. But it is challenging. But the best group can at the end of the day say we've done a good job at both supporting the ongoing direction of independent schools and brought some benefit to the fact that we're consolidated. It's going to best be done by those 2 groups working on it. But it is difficult, because the answer isn't instead of taking this one out of Charlotte, add it in to make it the same as the others. That's really not what you want to do. But I'll.
So there are 2 things we don't want to do, is just say, whatever any school has, every school will have.
Right.
And the other thing, we don't want to do either. If some schools, the other end of that, if some school doesn't have it, then the others don't need it, right? A race to the bottom is also not. That's the complexity that we're dealing with. And the piece around that individual schools have their own culture, they're proud of programs, they see it a little bit differently contextually. That's why it's important to have some kind of metric that you can say, well, at least we know that there's equal support behind every kid in that school, in all of our schools.
I get that piece, but I think the thing that frustrated me sitting just this past 2 years on the CVU board was, here we're adding power reading teachers and all of this extra support, And then you find, well, we're cutting summer school and we're cutting this in the K-8s, and it makes you think, we can't look at this just, does Charlotte have the same thing as Heinsberg? It's like, when they get to CVU, does it make sense that what we're doing in the K-8s, cutting or adding, isn't, we're not cutting our foot off when we get to CVU? And I think summer school is a perfect example where I think, why are we cutting it if we're having to re-add all this stuff back at CVU?
I would maintain that as a consolidated organization, that we will have a central office leadership team that is far less parochial than we've all tended to be in the past in the old structure, and have to give them credit and have to give them leeway to do things. And as Elaine said, everything is not going to be the same in each school. I don't know what's behind this possibly dropping summer school in Charlotte. Somebody thought it was a good idea. It'll get vetted. And understand if it does go away, well, what if anything is going to take its place, should something take its place?
I guess that's just the extra flavor to the equity piece.
Exactly. Right.
That's
Yeah.
my whole point.
And-
It's like,
and
yeah,
there-
call that equitable.
And not to throw another, complexity to the situation, but what if we had summer school programs going on in 3 out of the 4 schools, and kids could go wherever they want?
Yeah, that's
All
was going to
our
be my
kids.
point. Like, we're part of
All
a
our
bigger
kids.
school system.
But we need to figure that out, because it just can't be that on some date certain, we say, oh, go wherever you want.
But
We
equitable
need
is not
policies
identical.
and,
Right.
But Elaine, to that point, I think it makes for this board, as we develop the budget process and we start to look at decision packages for school, and not to cookie cutter everything, but take the Rocket program in Shelburne, right? That's interesting, and that's sort of an eye raiser. Like, well, why would you need a Rocket program? But if we as a board could sell it to a wider, our school district, right? I mean, it
That's the
behooves us to
conversation
have
Cindy and I
that
had
kind
with
of a program
the Rocket
within our
House.
district somewhere.
And Alice, just, there's more power than you might think in just giving this information to principals, because that's what we found through the journey of special education, is that by illustrating how one school is able to deliver services versus how another school is, does shape their decision-making over time, and it isn't coming in and saying, you all must look like this, but they take that data and they learn from each other. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the power that this process will have. It just might not have that impact in one single year.
So can I go back to, I don't want to reopen a conversation, I just want to make a comment. The first CSSU, 1 through 5 or whatever, instead of equating it with your current position, Bob, I think it might be helpful if we could look at the comparable FTEs with like positions in maybe similar supervisory union school districts of a comparable size. And it may mean looking out of state. So if we had a 5,000 or 4,000 student school district in XYZ states, whatever, they allocate 0.5 FTE towards, food service, or they hire facilities, whatever. But if we could equate some of those with FTEs, instead of trying to equate it with a person, but how much of a job is allocated towards those different activities? Because those functions need to happen. We know it needs to happen. And we've cobbled together what we think is appropriate, and we've been very lucky to have your expertise, enthusiasm, and unending energy to make sure that it all happened. But I don't think it's necessarily, what we've done is not necessarily what we want to do for the future. And if we want to really recruit good people, I would think someone coming into the position would want to have a sense of, do you know what kind of FTEs are allocated to these particular functions? And they may or may not want that.
Yeah, we can build some of that data.
Thank you.
I have another data request, so I like this. This is great. I'm a numbers person. I like numbers. They give it to me. So if we could get this, it's in the PowerPoint presentation that Elaine did. It's the focus on equity and autonomy chart. And update it with the impacts that the decision packets will have. So for instance, if you deleted summer school, how would that impact the numbers here? So if we could get the ones that you propose in this form, that would be great for me. I don't know if anybody else cares.
Yeah, small cost, high impact, whatever.
Right, yeah.
As someone quite new to the decision-making process, when we're eventually being asked to look at some of these questions, and especially as we're learning our way as a combined district, do we see input from, say, the point of view of a principal or a program administrator that has a vision of where they're trying to take, like, the context for that decision? Is there a mechanism for that kind of input at our level to understand the context? Or is it preferable, and this is a genuine question, I don't know, is it preferable for us to look at more of a distilled metrics level and try to take a holistic 30,000-foot view of, okay, and the balance of the school, this is the decision. How do we know even what the expectation is?
If I could, just to test I'm understanding, the list here, when it says CVU, it was by and large brought to the table as a result of work Adam and the staff have done at CVU to consider that. And that's the same thing for each of the schools. So there is a whole lot of principal engagement in this list coming together.
I had assumed as much.
Yeah.
But once it comes to the point of that list, if there are, if we don't approve everything, inevitably the things we don't approve, how do we understand the context of what we're not approving? I guess that's my question.
Right. So when they're filling out their decision packets, they have to respond to that.
Yeah.
What will be the impact of not approving this decision
so
packet?
that is
And
in there.
That's part of the questionnaire.
I think that it could be, John, you've never been through this process before, right? It is an actual, it's an actual packet of information, and that's why we call it decision packets, there's forms that you need to fill out that say positives, negatives, where the money's coming from, what's gonna be cut, and all of that will be clear.
Okay.
But I do have to just weigh in, because I was on the Act 46 committee, and this is going to be really hard for everybody who's ever done a budget before. But I think the days of looking at a $12,000 ad and debating it for this board are over. This board really should be looking at it. 3.2%, if we just ignore the debt increase, is a pretty freaking high number. And you want us to add stuff? Where are you going to take stuff out? We're thinking, kind of asked this, Eric, and I know you guys haven't had the discussion yet. What number are you anticipating administration to come forward with? And they should be telling you which of what they need to do that. Whether it's a decision packet or not is kind of immaterial unless you're adding program. But otherwise, if someone needs to add a math teacher in order to get to the right ratios, that should kind of be part of what Elaine brings to this board. It's different.
Right.
It's gonna be hard to get
That's
used to.
the piece. It's the transition from, we're used to, when money's free-flowing, we bring in a lot of decision packets, and the tax rate's gonna be okay, so we go for it. And when
We
money's,
also had 7 boards who had the time to go through and look at 5 different decision packets.
and they could look
Really-
myopically at their own system.
Right. I mean, aside from the CSSU positions, I'm looking at this thinking, there's very few that
We should not be engaged in it.
policy-directed
Yeah.
board would be voting on it all. That,
But it gets back to your other point, though. That has to be combined with, here's the number.
oh, that's my point, is that, my thought is that the board will say, inflation is 1.5%, student count's flat, come in at 1.5% plus the whatever, and tell us what the implications of that mean. And if you come back and say, that means I gotta cut 5 teachers and it's gonna do this class sizes, the board may reconsider. But,
Yeah.
sorry.
There's going to be an adjustment process.
Yes, it's gonna be.
From
Yeah.
how we used to what's going to be effective and efficient going forward. We could do it the old way, but we'd all be spending a lot more time in the next several months vetting these things, and to this gentleman's question and point earlier, the principal's input, or they're pleading their case, or however you want to describe it, whereas it was once made to the local boards, it seems more likely that it's going to be made to Elaine or other members of the central office leadership team rather than directly to the board. But that's an adjustment that people are going to have to get used to, in my view.
And what we care about are the criteria, the policy that drives that.
They have a
You know,
sound
the
decision-making
procedures in
process
place.
that's equitable.
But yeah, we're not going to be making decisions about a rocket program in Shelburne. However, I do like your point with the criteria. Does it connect to a long-term vision and, you know, the STEM fields, the science, technology, engineering, and math? I mean, that's important. Is it connected to something like that? That would be part of the criteria, I would think. Is that your point?
That's
Part of your
sort of my
point?
point, or to take the summer school example, it might be that there's a community, effort or a community movement in a certain town that I know nothing about that makes eliminating summer school somehow logical and equitable for that community, whereas it wouldn't fit for another. And if I don't know about that, then I'm going to say, oh, why are you doing that? And they'd say, well, and so that's the sort of exactly the sort of thing I was driving at. Is that
And so what we would be asking leadership is you come back and you tell us a story about how you got to that 2.5% or whatever the number is that we end up with.
But it is important to start with a number.
Well, so that's,
It's really hard to just do this because, you know, I mean, I think it's one of the things that we came to this afternoon after we really were very engaged in the conversation. And we do have a matrix, and we were trying to fill it out, but it's very, very different when you're filling it out as an individual organization. All you're doing there is prioritizing for yourself. Easy, easy peasy. And then very easy for the principal to come to his or her board and make the case. Easy. When you're comparing across the system and saying this instead of this, honestly, it's really, you could have a gazillion of these and it doesn't end up being that helpful. The ones that are easy are, we need an extra teacher because we've got 20 more kids at that grade level. That's easy. We need one less teacher because 8th grade graduated, and those are easy ones, and really they shouldn't be decision packets. They really should be, here's our policy around class size, here's how this all works. Still gonna get added to that matrix so that we can see what supports we have behind each kid, but it will be a process to transition. I totally agree with what Megan said, though. If you're a principal and you see all the numbers, and then you see all the requests, I think that that's what starts the conversation. And it gets back to what I said really early on. This isn't a one-year process. We should know where we're going, but it's not a one-year process to get there.
You mean equity when you say it's not a window?
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
so, I mean, that's, appreciate Jean's point. That was something that I brought up in an earlier meeting, which is to say that the sort of baseline budget plus decision packets is a much different approach than a top-down, what's the bottom line percentage increase that the board in its collective wisdom feels is appropriate. Because if you have a number, give guidance, let people make decisions about how they're going to get there. They have to make some difficult choices, some pluses and minuses, you know. I think the board still has a role to provide some guidance to the central office because there's no one sort of looking over them. At the, at the principal level, there's a certain amount of policy that, and curriculum development that's already been established that they're working within that framework. But, we still, it's not too late to have the board take an approach where we're maybe not trapping ourselves in a corner of going through an entire baseline budget decision packet dance and then finding we're at a number that nobody's comfortable with. So Bob gave us one look and heavily caveated that these numbers aren't finalized remotely on the revenue side, but even, there's still work being done to put a fine
you know, increases X percent, it doesn't quite go up X percent because not everybody who, you know, was a teacher and making 80 grand a year is still going to be there. We might bring in some new ones making 50. But, you know, that is going to be a key driver in whatever that 3.2%. The challenge is we have to decide what that number is long before we have a contract. And so, you know, again, it all comes down to, a lot of it comes down to how many people do we want to employ. And that's the biggest driver here. How many programs do we want to have? How many people do we want to have working for this entity?
Just to be clear, crystal clear, the increased debt service cost, that is fixed. We can't negotiate that one. That one is 1.67%, period. Okay. So then really we need to look at the without. I think that would be key to highlight.
Well, the community is not going to look at it without.
Well,
I guarantee Heinsberg's going to be looking at the total number.
It'll be part of the story that we're telling.
We have to tell the right story though. Because
But
if we go to them and say, hey, well, we got your 3% and you're going to have to cut blah, 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 blah. They'd be like, what did you do to me?
That debt service isn't uncontrollable at this point. It's there.
But when we voted on it, we voted on it as a separate article, you know, there's like, there's the bus, there, we all voted, like, there's that construction with the school. So it was a separate thing when we voted on it. It seems a little unfair to have to just throw it into the whole big budget that you're seeing in your number that you're voting on. I think it seems very legitimate to have it very clearly made to the public that this is what that extra amount is.
Only 2 communities voted on it, right?
Yes,
Right.
but we're a big community.
So I think we've had a great discussion about this, and I think we're lacking information, and we're going to get more information at our next meeting, and perhaps we can make a better decision or have more conversations. And should we table or curtail this conversation? Postpone? I mean, there's nothing really to continue here without any more information.
There's no action, so we don't need to do anything.
Right, so with the expectation that we'll have more information in 2 weeks and pick it up there.
So can I just clarify that the budget, the finance subcommittee or committee meets next week, and we don't meet as a board again until January, is that correct?
We meet in 2 weeks. We meet in Heinsberg on December 20th.
Oh, okay, so, all right.
Yep.
I think the dates on the.
The dates on the agenda are wrong, but it's
So the time for the budget meeting next week?
December 20th in Heinsberg.
So let's be completely clear.
Thank you.
The CVSD complete board will meet on December 20th at 5:30 at Heinsberg. And that's a continuation of this meeting right here.
At the Heinsberg School,
Yep.
not at CVU.
Right.
At the Heinsberg School, come half an hour early for a tour.
A tour, wouldn't miss it.
Oh, you have to see it.
Both buildings?
It's a pinwheel. You have to see the whole building. It's designed like a pinwheel, not designed on purpose like a pinwheel.
It's Vermont architecture.
So the finance committee meets next Tuesday at 4:30? Is that what I read, Eric?
Just check my calendar. Right?
Yeah.
And we are meeting where?
Aren't original.
Here at
Miranda
CVU.
sent that note out.
CVU?
You are meeting at CVU. We have you in sequence next week. There's an audit committee meeting at 3 o'clock. There's a budget committee meeting at 4:15, and I believe there's negotiations at 5:30.
And that's at CVU?
All of them at CVU. You just move from room to room.
And you want to retire?
Hi, Alice. I don't want to be old Bob, I've just counseled him. I'm original Bob.
Okay, so that segues nicely into our 613 calendar issue, which is March 6th is town meeting day, and we have a CVSD board meeting scheduled for that day. Should we postpone that meeting for a week and have it the
So-
following Tuesday, perhaps?
March 6th is our annual meeting. March 7th, Tuesday, is our regularly scheduled monthly meeting.
That's what I'm confuse the 6th with the 7th, but our Tuesday evening meeting for CVSD is gonna be on town meeting day. Sensitive to Heinsberg, who actually does have a meeting on Tuesdays, don't they?
No.
But-
No? Okay, because ours is on Monday, but
No, but the votes will not be in. I
Right,
mean,
and there's no
even when it was
reason.
just CVU, we weren't done counting votes till, Joan, you know, you're one of the people that's there.
Thank you,
It's
Lynn.
like 10 o'clock at night before we have,
yeah, I mean, we don't
A
need to
vote
go.
count.
I mean, I totally get it, and that's why I said, should we meet the following Tuesday,
14th.
the 14th?
Do we have a negotiations thing that day?
we do.
Yeah.
So then,
Tentatively, until, we'll know next week.
We would most likely have a budget or a finance committee meeting too.
So we could meet either on Monday, the 13th, or we could meet on Wednesday, the 8th.
Vote for Wednesday, the 8th.
You know,
Yeah.
that's kind of, you know, that makes sense in a way because we would know the results.
okay,
And it would be right after,
all right. Sounds good. Sounds like a good idea.
Wednesday, the 8th.
I can't believe how many times that calendar was circulated, and it took Colleen in early December to find it for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen.
Glad I could be of service.
Yeah. I think one of the calendars that was circulated actually said town meeting day on it.
Yeah.
And we didn't, so, all right. So move on to the consent agenda. Could I get a motion to approve the consent agenda from last month?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. We did confirm next dates, December 20th, 5:30 at Heinsberg. We are not having a executive session because the negotiations meeting isn't until next week. Could I get a motion to adjourn? However, I need a majority of you to come sign this
I have, yes.
acknowledgement of assumption. Oh, you have one there. Why do we have two if you're walking around with?
Because there's two different banks.
Two different backs, yeah.
This one for
So is that Peoples and that's his Merchant?
I need a 3-ring notebook. That's what I need.
All right. Thank you for coming.
Be handy.
Yes.
Yeah, here.
Thank you for hosting us. It's a wonderful
Vermont,
school.
local Vermont banks.